So we have come around to that time, late May, Roland Garros season, which became all too familiar and pretty much synonymous with the great Rafael Nadal. And in accordance with his grand ceremony tomorrow, I assume the French will roll out the red carpet for him as they did, really as a country for the Paris Olympics. But Roland Garros getting to dish out their tribute to Rafael Nadal. I think, we've got basically confirmation, but not official confirmation that Federer will be in attendance. Djokovic also will be there for the tournament, so, he's a shoo-in as well to be in attendance. Pretty much any of the significant players that crossed paths or, were inspired by Nadal, I would assume a litany of them will be in attendance, with it taking place during opening day of the tournament, which all should come full circle, hit really hard in the nostalgia vein, and really just be an awesome experience for all, hopefully most of all for Rafa himself. But in celebration, I also thought it would be a good time to dole out what's become my favorite thing to do on this channel, and that is to unveil another one of my history lesson lists. That's right, kids. This time we got the top 10 Rafael Nadal clay court tournaments of his career, according to yours truly. And I gotta say, narrowing it down to 10, surprisingly easier than I thought for a guy that won 63 in total clay titles. Most of that due to Nadal oftentimes taking the suspense entirely out of the equation and dominating so thoroughly. Something that also just stopped being remarkable after a while, too, because even the dominance became the expectation. Now, mind you, sometimes the dominance was just so beyond belief that you could never forget it, and best believe some of those made their way onto this list. So, on that note, let's get it started. Number 10, greatest Rafael Nadal clay court tournament. We kick off the honors with Rome 2005. The final of this tournament might be the single greatest in a vacuum match that Nadal ever played on clay. All the figures, speak for themselves. 5 hours, 14 minutes. I believe longest match of his career on clay, and a screaming endorsement for best of 5 Masters 1000 finals. And all in all, we can pretty much skip right to the final. I think this is a really cool symbolic match as well, because even though Guillermo Coria is much closer to Rafa's gen than that of, the clay quarters of years past, especially those that immediately preceded Rafa that, saw a lot of success on the dirt, particularly those 90s guys, Guga, Jim Courier, Sergi Bruguera, Thomas Muster, etc., etc. And of course, Nadal's arrival wouldn't really allow for that type of parity on the surface over the coming years, but this was stylistically a very nice insight, sort of opportunity to see that sort of pure clay quarter style go head-to-head against Rafa, because as he would develop, more often than not, he would come to bully that style. Even with this evolution of an 18-year-old Rafa Nadal, still a lot of the things that come to define him later on are on full display. A lot of the auxiliary parts of his game, still a work in progress, still a little bit raw, but the forehand is still huge. The speed at this point is absolutely mythical. Obviously, still a fighter out of the box was Rafael Nadal. Big heart, problem-solving, mental resistance well beyond his years at this point. And this match is just peak clay court tennis, as opposed to their first matchup weeks prior for Nadal's first Masters 1000 title in Monte Carlo. Here, Guillermo Coria is throwing the kitchen sink, everything he can handle, and it's not certainly pushy tennis, as you can see with the highlights. Both guys deliver a great deal of muscle in this match. I mean, both of them actually go over the 60 winner mark. Nadal in the 5th rallies from a double break 0-3 down. And if you don't know, down the stretch in the tie break, just shows some straight fearlessness, youthful exuberance on full display. Energizer Bunny at this point. Some fearless, shot making on the forehand combined with on match point some gets that really only this version of him probably is capable of to, stay alive on the match point and ultimately elicit the error from Coria. Quite simply one of the greatest matches of all time. So how do you follow that? You go from 18-year-old to 34-year-old. That's right, we go from summer 2005 to the fall of 2020. And I'm sure many of you will be surprised to see that I only have Roland Garros 2020 slated in at number 9. Because I am aware, in large part that this win, this tournament is held very highly in tennis discourse among Nadal's career bests. And I also know why I and discourse feel on opposite ends of that is because we felt at opposite ends of it at the time. Whereas popular discussion was the conditions, tournament being held in the fall while it was cold, didn't allow for Nadal's favorite conditions, the hot, dry Roland Garros clay court where his ball's just kicking absurd heights. But, listen, Nadal's clay court dominance was never just predicated on conditions. Look no further than a handful of his finals played on gray, cool, damp, if not drizzly Sundays. But there was also other stuff at play here. Rafa had not played since February, made it with the pandemic break, 6 months plus in between his first match action and lead up to Roland Garros being a handful of matches in Rome, where he lost earlier than expected to Diego. Worries about, rust were legitimate, but Rafa had been playing well before the pandemic break, and to me, it was still very clearly Nadal-Djokovic cut above the rest at this point, so I thought they were on a collision course. Still had to be wary of Djokovic, who had yet to lose a completed match, of course, but, I was of the mindset, it's Rafa at Roland Garros. He should be fine with a couple of matches to play himself into form, and that's what ended up happening. He wasn't particularly spectacular, sluggish in fact at times in his lead up to the final, didn't really play particularly great until late in the center quarterfinal into the semis, but nothing would have prepped us for the level he uncorked in the final. There was no indication all tournament long he had that in him. And again, this is a big part of the mythology of this win is, going into the final, Goran's comments in the Djokovic coaching box, very confident that his charge was going to upseat Rafa at Roland Garros this year. The conditions make it so he wouldn't have a chance. But watching the match, I'll tell you, what's so spectacular about it is at this point in Rafa's career, he's lost a considerable amount of foot speed, and he's a very aggressive-minded player. But he did a great deal of damage looking surprisingly a lot like his old self, looking just impenetrable, a wall. He hits only 7 unforced errors through the first 2 sets, and Djokovic just can't find a way through him, and he really just doesn't put a foot wrong almost the entire match. Honestly sells Novak short on the scoreboard, but what can you do? You meet this guy enough times at Roland Garros, you are going to get your beat down. Finals performance carries this one, I think. Truly one of the iconic signature performances of his career. And something so cool about the commentary around this one with, so many crazy things going down in 2020, so much uncertainty. Something still familiar with Rafa lifting up the Coupe de Musketeers, even in a year where so much was off with the tournament itself. I know a lot of people in the fan base love this one as a quote-unquote underdog Rafa at RG win. Honestly, I have no problems with it being higher. I just have my preferences. Moving on, number 8. One of the rare best of 3 entries in here. A non-Roland Garros entry. I go Hamburg 2008. It was a year prior that Roger Federer had snapped Rafa's 81-match win streak on clay at this very venue. And Nadal comes back a year later, not only avenges that loss, getting his get back at Roger in the final, but also what's unique about this tournament is he beats Andy Murray, Novak Djokovic, and Roger Federer within the course of this tournament. Something that is unique to this tournament in particular, and regardless of what phases in each other's careers they were all at, That would make this one memorable, count for something regardless. And yeah, when you put in the context, Andy Murray still, relatively young, not much of a clay courter certainly yet, but was on his way that year to a real breakout. And then Novak Djokovic, to that point, you could argue, had been the best player that season, won the Australian Open, won Indian Wells, had just won Rome coming into Hamburg, and boy, when they played, I would say this is probably the first true epic between Nadal and Djokovic. Quality-wise, this one clears Madrid 09 in my opinion. Djokovic was able to carry on with the physical rigor in that match longer. Nadal extracted some, energy out of him as this one neared its end, but still, this was, the first, I think, of Nadal Djokovic just going to war on a tennis court. Ridiculous displays of athleticism. Really, really inspired stuff by Novak still. It ended up being Nadal's overwhelming physical skills and mental reserves in the end pulls him out for a hard-earned win. And that wasn't even the end of it. I mean, the only thing people remember from 08 between Federer and Nadal on clay is the RG final because of how comprehensive it was. But Federer actually played him really well in Monte Carlo and in Hamburg that year. And ultimately, both Federer and Djokovic play really, really well and end up leaving empty-handed against the Nadal at the peak of his powers. They gave it their best shot, but it still was just inevitable. And I mean, in that particular final, Federer's up 5-1 in the first set point as well, and he ends up losing that set. This is after also losing a 4-0 lead in Monte Carlo, and even the second, he's up 5-2, and ultimately has to win it 7-5. And all that for no dejection, no drop-off in the decider. Nadal sees it out 6-3 in the third. And yeah, that's very representative of just the battering ram that he was on clay, especially at his peak. I mean, Federer, Djokovic both played exceptionally well, and they came away empty-handed. Because it just seemed like he was ever present at a truly immortal level that required redlining like all the time. And you could do it in patches, but it was never just going to be sustainable to stay at that sky-high level. The moment it dropped a little bit, he was going to be all over it. The names are spectacular. The matches, the performances to come through are even more so. This one earns its spot at number 8. Number 7, I go Roland Garros 2013. This was Nadal's first major played since Wimbledon 2012 when he was shocked by Lucas Rosol and then unable to take the court again until February of 2013. Off 7 months off, it did not take long for Nadal to hit the ground running. Of course, one in the Golden Swing, one Indian all-time great clay court performances to end Nadal's 8-year-long Monte Carlo winning streak, and for another year, we get Nadal Djokovic in a way where nobody has and nobody ever will be this close to being an equal to especially a prime Nadal on clay. And it goes from 2012 to 2014, really. There's some real intrigue there, even though Rafa goes on to win the next 3 clay court titles in Barcelona, Madrid, and Rome. There's a case to be made this is the most difficult draw on paper that Nadal has faced at Roland Garros. His first round, his first major match since the Rosol match, Daniel Brands, I distinctly remember something straight out of Soderling's book in that first round for 2 sets. Absolutely clobbering the ball in a way that really had me spooked. I mean, he was up a mini break in that second set tiebreaker, but Nadal able to see his way through out of that match. Still very scratchy, really, up until week 2. Rounds into form for the dream semifinal, de facto final this year, where Nadal and Djokovic play each other because Rafa was still seeded 3 at this point, making up rankings points. And there's not really much to be said. This match is what earns this tournament, in my eyes, its spot on this list. Probably the greatest Roland Garros match Nadal's ever been a part of. Obviously, Novak Djokovic's most spirited challenge to Nadal's supremacy at Roland Garros during his prime. in many ways a mirror match to Australia 2012. Not quite as physical, but similar in plot lines where the challenger, by the skin of their teeth, granted themselves a fifth set and then took control of the fifth early. Same way, up a break midway through the fifth. This time it's Djokovic who makes the grave error touching the net. Nadal goes on to break back in that game. And, I'll say throughout the course of this fifth set, it is the Nadal forehand that saved the day because, he really threw caution to the wind in this fifth set. It made the fifth set, I think, one of the best sets that they have ever played. And the type of ball didn't really matter. On the run, half volley, low margins, ill-advised. That forehand was a flamethrower in the decider, and it seemed like he connected on everything that was audacious. And when that last Djokovic forehand went long to seal a 9-7 in the fifth victory, that was pretty much as good as championship point. A lesser player may have had a letdown from such a high, still having to play a quality David Ferrer in his best year. But Ferrer himself, probably only second to Djokovic as the man that had been tormented the most by Nadal at RG 2012 through 14. As he was every one of those years, he ended up in the finals this year on the receiving end of a pretty comprehensive Nadal win. And Rafa was back like he never left. Number 6, we have the arrival. And as we documented, 18-year-old Rafa Nadal, it is crazy to me that he had worked his way by the time he was about to make his Roland Garros debut because of, physical troubles both in 03 and 04 when he was initially supposed to debut there. But even so, at 18, the fact that he was, at this point, the favorite going into the tournament, while sharing the stage with a peak Roger Federer who had a great clay court season himself, just won Hamburg, it speaks volumes to where he was already. And this one has great moments all over the place. Throughout, we have these just anime-like celebrations, real just Energizer Bunny vibes all around. The playing style, the celebrations, all of it, the appearance, the forehand, something that grew very iconic. The first point that Roger and him played in the semifinals of their first Grand Slam match was a crazy running Nadal forehand pass that, we would get used to seeing a lot over the coming years. You also saw the composure amid a hostile crowd against Grosjean when the French crowd really caused a huge fit in the middle of that match, even stopped play for a little bit. And then also the clutchness in the final where first time on that stage rallies from a set down against Mariano Puerta, who also here is the closest to seeing a fifth set with Nadal in a French Open final. He has 3 set points, I believe, on his serve, and Rafa able to maneuver out of that. Sees his way to a famous win. The love affair with Paris all starts there. It's almost, a fairy tale. First time playing, beats Roger on his 19th birthday. Handed the trophy in the final by Zinedine Zidane. The first of many, of course, the sight we would be used to seeing Nadal in the Coupe de Musketeers. Number 5, one after the other. How about that for symmetry? The finale. That being Roland Garros 2022, the last of the 14. This one was super special to me in the moment, will always be super special to me because it is the most mortal that he is relative to the rest of the field of the 14. I think this is the Nadal underdog French Open run, if there is such a thing, because obviously there's a lot of uncertainty coming in. It's such a brilliant injury comeback immediately for Nadal in 2022, and then, his clay season's derailed by the rib injury. He comes back, rushes back, the foot is giving him problems again, and there's a lot up in the air about his state for Roland Garros. Well, we get several time capsule moments out of Nadal this French Open run. Goes 4 hours plus, wins only the third match. He's pushed 5 at Roland Garros against Felix in the 4th round. Throws it back, arguably his last vintage performance against Novak Djokovic. in the quarterfinals. Another match where the level was unexpected, a la 2020. And it proves to be the last punch from him in his all-time rivalry with Novak Djokovic. And then another, underratedly great physical feat for a guy with that much mileage on his body. He ends up not being the first to buckle despite playing 2 4-hour matches coming in what could have only been oven-like conditions under the Chatrier roof against an inspired Alexander Zverev, while Rafa himself probably unable to access anything beyond his C game because the circumstances, the conditions, but really shows some strong mettle here to get out of trouble on the scoreboard in both sets and just stay the course. And then fittingly, his last title in his career period ends with another demolition derby of a final. He wins the last 11 games of his final against Casper Ruud, showing he still has that gear on this court that can pretty much deem a match over at command. Bring home a really, really satisfying win, and one that I am ultimately happy was the last trophy he would raise. On to number 4. Now, I did not anticipate having a best of 3 entry here in the top 5, but if you ask me, Monte Carlo 2010 is truly that important and truly that impressive, because 14 games, 5 matches, that's all he conceded. Are you kidding me? I mean, Nadal has, laid waste to tougher draws than this, but it's not like these guys are pushovers. At the end of the day, they are professionals, and, he saw very competent clay court pedigree there in Ferrer and Verdasco, 2 guys in their prime at the time, top players at the time, and he just ragdolled everybody. And of course, the most famous moment from this tournament run comes from the other side of the net, and the agony, the sheer disbelief of what it took to win a point. Fernando Verdasco down 0-6, 1-4. Nadal serving up a double break. There's no reason for him to be chasing down balls that he does in this point. And Verdasco has to win this point about 5 different times. And when he finally wins it off a dropper that Nadal can't quite put back in play, he drops to his knees. And there's a lot of great moments over the years of, victims of Nadal on clay and their reactions. But I gotta say, this one and the Almagro, nod and chat to his box in 08, the famous he'll be 65 and still be winning Roland Garros. Those two really take the cake for me. And in the broader context, this is the win that gets Nadal's 2010 jump started. He was playing a lot better from the jump in 2010 after a rough close to 2009, but just, some frustrating close but no cigar losses up to that point, and he hadn't won a title since Rome of 2009, almost a full year, so, he just emphatically shook that juju, and the rest is history. I mean, he goes undefeated the clay court season, wins all the big titles. You could just as easily put Roland Garros 2010 here as well for the revenge on Soderling, but honestly it was a formality at this point, and largely that's because the announcement he made here at Monte Carlo that I'm back, everybody else is playing for second, that is just how ridiculously dominant that Monte Carlo win was. It really sent that message. And before we get into the top 3, let me just rattle off some honorable mentions. These not in a particular order, just how they came to mind. Rome 2021, this proves to be his last Masters title, and, really a very rigorous path to the title, semifinal aside. Really impressive win at his age. Then I got Monte Carlo 2018, Rome 2019, 2 tournaments that stand out of old doll goating. Bakery products dished out to just about any and everybody in his path. RG 2014, the last of the 3 that I would be able to consider in that underdog RG category between 2020 and 2022. To this point, 2014 clay season, easily the most vulnerable Nadal's looked on clay. Kind of jarring up to that point because dominance has been the expectation and the guy wins. only Madrid and a Rome final, and the sky was falling for him. There was a point in time where this one really was very, very special for me, and for a while it looked like it might be his last slam win. And I still always think it's awesome to watch back the highlights of this tournament because the forehand went absolutely nuclear, and it carries him to the title in epic fashion despite supposedly being vulnerable coming in. Wins the title anyway in relatively dominant fashion. Then you gotta have Roland Garros 2007. Sneaky good draw here. I mean, he plays 5 guys that had or would go on to win slams. You could argue his most competitive best final with Federer in the French Open final here. But what else we got? We got Rome 06, obviously the best Nadal match on clay. Absolute epic. One of the best matches they ever played. Roger Federer throwing absolutely everything he can handle on a clay court at Rafa in that one. Honestly could go either way on the list between this one and the Coria match. They sort of represent the same thing at a similar point in Nadal's career. I also throw in Rome 2007. Recently, I watched back highlights of the Davydenko match and the Djokovic match, where Nadal is just moving like a dream, man. I mean, sleeper great matches, and Rafa goes without saying in imperious form. I also list Madrid 2017. I think this might be my pick for Nadal's best Masters win in his 30s. And honestly, I wasn't completely sold on his form during the 2017 clay court season till Madrid. I felt like he'd seen softball opposition to that point, and Team didn't play particularly great at Barcelona. But I mean, whenever Nadal won Madrid, he won the French Open. It was the toughest of the clay Masters for him. Before that, you could loop in the history with Hamburg since they served the same calendar space, similar conditions. And he played really well in Madrid this year, validated with the final. I think, actually, underratedly, the only time Nadal and Team played at their best against each other on a clay court. And I was sold after Rafa came through that final. And then lastly, one of the big reasons I wasn't sold on his form until Madrid in 2017 was because I thought he was really good in 2016, and that his Monte Carlo title that year was better than his Monte Carlo title in 17, just because it was a really damn good draw in 2016 he went through from his second match on there. And even more crucial, it showed that there were signs of life. Way more juice left in the tank than I thought at the time, of course. And it kind of all starts in Indian Wells, but really it starts here in Monte Carlo when he finally wins a big title again for the first time in almost 3 years. Unreal epic forehand winner on the run on championship point to seal it as well. And there you have it, my honorable mentions. Getting down to the top 3, at number 3, I go Roland Garros 2012. I think overall, as far as playing level goes, this is his second best French Open ever. Arguably his most dominant run-up to a French Open final is this year. But above all, this one was huge just to stem the tide for his psyche. Of course, he comes in having lost to Novak Djokovic at the last 3 majors. History on the line for both of them. Nadal to break the men's record for most French Opens, Borg 6, and Djokovic to complete the Nole Slam 4 in a row. But more importantly, Nadal needed to defend the land against this guy, because, you know, it really would have been a devastating blow if, after stemming the tide a little bit already, beating Djokovic for the first time in 7 attempts at Monte Carlo and Rome, if he was able to pry away Roland Garros as well at this point in their careers, who knows how that goes down. But lucky for Rafa Nadal, in 2012 on red clay, he is in some of the best form of his career. He can feel confident going in. Everything is going according to plan for 2 sets, breaks early in the third. Before a final that had been playing through a soft drizzle throughout, Nadal's potency waned a little bit. The balls were puffing up as he gestured to his camp, and Djokovic was able to get on a run and really put Nadal on his heels. For one of the only times we have seen it on Chatrier, he goes from up 2-0 in the third to down 2-0 in the fourth before he's able to stop the run of 8 straight games. The rain has been getting heavier for the better part of the last hour, but at this point, they're unable to continue. Of course, the next day in drier conditions, a new day, the slate wiped clean. Nadal's able to reset, bring this one home 7-5 in the fourth. You see immediately how much it means to him. He's in tears. The way he celebrates with his family, his team, you can really see how much this one meant to him. In the moment, one of the most important wins of his career. And for the number 2 slot, I go 2017 Roland Garros. With this win, Rafa Nadal broke new ground with La Decima, becomes the first man to win 10 of any slam, having just crossed 31 years of age, and wins his first slam in 3 years. It's really the culmination of a 2.5-year long slump where even some of his staunchest fans and believers, such as myself, especially now as he crosses age 30, he's a guy that, throughout the course of his career, that the way he plays, how injury prone he is, it's not conducive to great longevity. And in the period leading into 2017, it seems like all of that is coming to roost. But of course, he has I put this guy back on clay, and the titles are probably going to come again. And indeed they did, as Nadal went on to win the first 3 of his European clay court season titles that year, at which point it was another year of coming into Roland Garros like it feels more like a coronation than a competition even before the event had began. And throughout the course of Roland Garros 2017, Nadal played with a vengeance, played with a hunger of a guy that had been starved a slam title for 3 years. By the numbers, his most dominant Roland Garros match, of course, there is a retirement mid-match in his quarterfinal. But all in all, only drops 35 games throughout the course of the tournament. Only 3 times throughout the course of the run does someone even get 4 games in a set on him. Not a single extended set, let alone any sets dropped. And again, handing out bakery products left and right, of course, Nicolas Basilashvili on the receiving end of a 6-0, 6-1, 6-0. Dominic Thiem received a bagel, and in the final, this is one of the all-time great Nadal performances. I think pretty easily the best performance of his 30s, just factoring in his play. Stan Wawrinka rendered helpless, pretty much just a spectator. Another round of great reactions from an opponent on the receiving end of a Nadal clinic. Utterly untouchable from start to finish in this one. Fitting that his return to the top of the game is stamped here, and that it marks the beginning of this renaissance into his 30s. And it only gets beat out by Roland Garros 2008. And yeah, it's pretty obvious why this is the pick. This is the quintessential Nadal at Roland Garros experience. You think about Nadal at Roland Garros, chances are you think about this version. A much cooler, more polished look of the green sleeveless tee as opposed to his first one in 05. Raising his arms to a bit of a muted celebration after a Federer forehand went long on championship point to give us the final score of 6-1, 6-3, 6-0 over Roger Federer in a major final. That will forever be ingrained in people's minds, the final beatdown in particular. But Roger Federer was not alone in that. This is the first of 4 times that Nadal goes on to win the tournament without dropping a set. As we know, we get the great rant from Almagro when he lays waste to him. Did the same to Verdasco. Djokovic is able to put in some solid resistance, but he is not rewarded with a set either. It's weird to say, only 4 Roland Garros titles, but even after just winning his 4th, this one really stamps home, this guy has a real air of invincibility about him. And visually, as far as just clay courts go, this is the best marriage of his skill sets at a certain point in time. He still has his peak speed and can hit winners from literally anywhere on the court, get to balls that nobody else could fathom getting to, but also really at this point he has become a much more polished all-around complete player. The serve is no longer a liability, the backhand is a very worthy shield and weapon when it wants to be, and the forehand stays forehanding. The prospect of beating this guy this tournament, it wasn't even a real thing. Quite simply, 08 Roland Garros Nadal was inevitable, and it certainly sparked Nadal's continued onslaught into eventually becoming the best player in tennis for the first time that summer. And that brings down the curtain on my list. Really looking forward to this Nadal ceremony. Got a lot of great farewells last season. The bridge in Rome, the torch at the Olympics opening ceremony. Can only imagine what Paris and Roland Garros has in store. I'm sure they will spoil him and us rotten. Looking forward to seeing it. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on my list in the comment section below. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see you all in the next one.